Welcome to lesson number 2 of Colgate VisLab's training in Autodesk Maya. In today's lesson, we're going to cover some basic modeling skills. To do that, we're going to build a small building which will be used in later lessons. Today's main topics are going to be polygon primitives, object manipulation, scaling objects, working with vertices, edges, and faces, adding edge loops through the multi-cut tool, and extrusion of object faces. So, let's get started. Now, to begin with, we're going to be working with polygon primitives. You can find the polygon primitive creation tools up top here under the Polygons tab, as well as many other different tools to work with these polygons. Right now, we're going to focus on these here. These are the generation tools for each individual type of polygon primitive. You have spheres, cubes, cylinders, cones, planes, toruses, pyramids, and tubes. These are going to be your basic polygon primitives that you'll be able to work with when you start up Autodesk Maya. And choosing which one you'd like to use to begin your object or building or character or whatever it ends up being is important, because essentially that will dictate where your object goes from there, which primitive you decide to build off of. So, I'm going to choose a polygon cube to begin with, because the building that I intend to build for you guys is a square-shaped building. So, when you create a polygon cube, it spawns on the origin by default. Now, you see that here, and you can see it mapped out on the grid here. Over here, in what's called the channel box, you have a variety of controls for that object. You can translate it by highlighting, oh, by the way, you can manipulate these by highlighting the various attributes and holding the middle mouse button and dragging back and forth. Additionally, you can highlight these sections here and add your own numbers, like that. That covers basic object manipulation. You can translate, rotate, and scale the object. So in beginning our little building here, I'm going to scale this. But you see, when I do that, using the scale tool here, it only scales it a certain way. So what I want to do is scale it in 2 dimensions, but not the vertical one. So I'm going to do that here. The next thing I'm going to do is select a face, which I do by holding down right click, and you get the window here, and clicking face. That allows me to manipulate just this single face on the object. If, for example, I want to manipulate edges instead of faces, I could hold down that same right click and go to edge. And that will allow me to manipulate just this edge of the object. And finally, if I want to manipulate vertices, or a single vertex on the object, I hold down that same right click and go to vertex, excuse me. This will allow me to manipulate just that vertex. Alright, well, as I said before, I'd like to use faces. I find that starting with faces is a lot easier because it allows you to sort of rough out the broader shape of your object, and then from there like add the finer details of said object. So now that we have what I assume to be the basic height that I'd like this house to be, or this building, or whatever you want to call it, I'm going to add some of those finer details. To do that, I'm going to use what's called the multi-cut tool. Now you can find this tool in Maya versions 2015 through the current version 2017, And given that you guys will most likely be using 2016 for most of your work, you should be able to find it right up top here. Now, the way the multi-cut tool works is that if you hover over an object, you can see that you can stitch a new vertice or a new edge made up of vertices on your object. If you trace those out and click points on edges, you can create new vertices and stitch together a new face. In the case of our modeling this object, however, I'm going to use it to generate edge loops. What that means is that I'm going to come in here with our multi-cut tool, hold Shift, and hold Control. When you do that, you can see that you can actually generate snapping edge loops. This means that they will be accurate edge loops based on distance from either side of your edge. It's just basic geometry. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to add several edge loops here that allow me to add some finer details to this object. The reason I'm doing this is because I'd like to be able to have, I guess, certain parapets, certain pieces. Yeah. I'd like to be able to have a little more detail in my object, and I'd like to be able to do what's called extrude faces from this object. So I'm going to add some edge loops there, add one down here, and what that'll allow me to do is build the roof of our little house. So to build that roof, now that we have the basic building, I'm going to do what's called extruding. Now extruding is simply pulling an extension out of a polygon. So you see I have these polygons highlighted. And I do that by just holding down that right click like before, hovering over face, and letting go. So I select all of these faces. I double check to make sure that none were selected through the back face. And I do Control E, and then hit W again to bring us back to the basic movement tool. What this does is allows us to pull out an additional amount of polygon from our object. I'm going to do this to literally raise the roof. Then, because I want more detail in my roof, I'm going to raise this a bit and then proceed to work with edges. I did that, again, by holding down right click, moving to edge, and then highlighting these edges the same way I would faces. And lowering them a bit. And then because I want even more detail, I'm going to work in vertices. And I did that the same way, a vertex. And I'll raise that center point. I'll then go through and select a few other vertices. And as you watch here, you can get an idea of how I choose to build this roof. Now you see here I'm using the multi-cut tool again to stitch a new edge through my object. I'm selecting vertices, just clicking, 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 and then hitting enter to confirm. Clicking, 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 enter to confirm. Now once that's done, you can see I got a sharper edge there, which is what my goal was. I'm going to loft this roof a bit more by grabbing multiple vertices by holding Shift and clicking, and pulling up on the manipulator, holding Shift and clicking after clicking away to wipe out the selection from the previous lift, and raising them up a bit more. Now, That's a nice tent-style roof. However, I'd like there to be a bit of an overhang in this object. So what I'm going to do is go to my edges, pull up a bit to get a smaller edge here, highlight the full strip of the edge here, this full loop of faces, and I did that by clicking one, holding shift, and double clicking the next one in line, and that highlights the entire loop. And then I'm going to do Control E again for extrude, and this time I'm going to go to the scale tool, and I'll be using X and Z scale and scaling out my extrusion. You see you get that overhang there, and then I'll move back to translation and scale them down, or move them down, translated in the y-axis. You see you have that sort of overhang there now. Now that's a little wide for me, so I'm going to scale it back in, and then up. And then additionally, I don't necessarily like the size of that, so I'm going to just select and double click and move it up a bit to get a thinner edge there, because I want it to be thinner. Now all of this sort of thing, like these sort of tweaks that I'm making to my building, are going to be up to you guys to use your discretion to determine when to do that sort of thing. Oftentimes, and in fact hopefully 100% of the time, you guys will have a visual reference to go by when you're building a building. I'm doing this from scratch, so it's really just up to me how I choose to create this. But for the most part, it's going to be you looking at a reference to determine whether or not the details here match the details on your image. Okay, so moving forward, I'm going to add another edge loop here. And just for fun, I want to create some little inlays in our little storage unit here. I'd like, just for the sake of detail for our texturing later, I'm going to Control E for extrude again. And extrude inward, just to give this a little more detail. You see how I did that? And additionally, because I'd rather they not slant in like that, I'm going to grab these edges and scale them back out. What I'm doing here sort of creates the illusion that there are pillars that hold up the foundation of this building. All right. Now we sort of have a little basic building here. I don't know, why not? Let's say I don't like this roof. The other thing we can do, in addition to extruding, is we can cut pieces of the polygon off. The way I do that is I highlight this stuff and just hit delete. That removes a section of this polygon. Now, unfortunately, that leaves us with a hole and a problem, because we don't want to necessarily see inside this structure, because that would, unless the interior is modeled, remove a bit of detail. So what I'm going to do is go to, I could do one of two things. I could plug this hole again by going Mesh, Fill Hole, and there it's nice and sealed up. However, we wanted a difference in this, so I'm going to highlight this edge loop, Control E for extrude, and bring down the edge into this object. And then, only then, I'm going to go Mesh, Fill Hole. And that's about it. Those are the basic tools of modeling. Now, can I get a lot more complex than this? Yes. I could spend hours and hours adding tiny little details to this model. I don't think you want to sit through that. So, for now, I think we're going to call it done. This is basic modeling in Autodesk Maya for the VisLab. Our next lesson is going to be on texturing, so be on the lookout for that. Thanks for watching.